On any given day, there are 2.7 million children who currently have a parent incarcerated in America. And over 10 million people have experienced a parent behind bars at some point in their lives. This is not a unique story. This is a part of the American story. From the lenses of young adults, this podcast explores the harm of poverty, mass incarceration, the beauty and resilient relationships, and the pain of fractured bones. Join our co-hosts as they enter the sanctuary with our guests in this episode of If Only You Knew.
My name is Mia.
Hello, my name is Amari, and welcome to our sanctuary.
Today we have for you Dr. Angela Charlton.
Thanks for coming on.
Yes.
Thank you for having me.
So tell us about yourself, a little bit about your background, what you do here, and why your work is so important.
Okay. So I have worked in a variety of settings. So I most recently worked with professional athletes. So I was the team counselor for the Oklahoma City Thunder. I've worked for the NBA. I've also worked for the NFL. So I've been doing a lot of things with professional athletes, but I've also been a school counselor. So I spent many years working with children, which I love. So I definitely have a passion for working with children and young people, as well as athletes. Some of the other things that I've done, I work for a nonprofit right now. And their focus is to help young adults find careers. So not just jobs, but to find careers. So I've done a variety of things. I've worked as an addiction counselor. I worked in a retirement home. It's always been in the counseling field, but I've done, every population pretty much you can think of, from like kids to adults. And I also worked in a mental health facility. Dealing with people that had mental health disorders.
Wow, you're like all over the board. That's really successful. Congratulations.
Thank you. So now I'm excited about this opportunity to work with you guys.
Oh, thank you. That means a lot.
You're welcome.
I think initially I wanted to ask, being as though we are children that have incarcerated parents, and we're specializing these topics on, those conversations that we can have with our parents or our caretakers in our life that have been, incarcerated. And, have you experienced any of that, or any advice that you can give us?
Yes, definitely have experienced that. I'll start with, I usually call those like difficult conversations. And when you have a difficult conversation like the one that you guys are going to have with your parents, or if anybody's having that conversation with a parent that's incarcerated, there's a couple of things to keep in mind. So first and foremost, make sure you're in a mental place to have that conversation. So what I mean by that is make sure you've taken care of yourself, done some of the little things that you can do to make sure your mental space is good. So for example, when you look at like with the whole person, making sure you're eating well, you're getting enough sleep, exercising, finding time to do things that are relaxing and fun. And the reason that that's important is because everything's connected. So stress can impact your body, and if you're not in a good place emotionally, then your emotions can take over within that conversation. And that kind of brings me to the next thing, which is don't let your emotions control you. So try to take more of a cognitive approach, and keep in mind that your mind controls how you feel and how you act. So if you go in with the right mentality, it's going to help take control of your feelings and emotions during that difficult conversation. And one of the other most important things to remember within that conversation is that it is part of the healing process, but you go into those conversations for yourself, and you can only control what you say, how you respond. You're not going to be able to control how that other person responds. And a lot of times people get into those situations, whether it's a difficult conversation or any type of conversation, and it's the expectations that they don't manage. So it's really important to manage your expectations and know that that person may not respond the way that you want them to respond, nor they may not respond in a way that makes you feel better, or they might not be sensitive, or they might not own some of their responsibilities for how you're feeling. But always remember, your feelings are your feelings, and you feel the way you feel, and nobody can take that away from you. It's just important to not let your feelings like drive and be in control of everything.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
definitely.
I can resonate with that 100%. A part of having a conversation, especially that difficult conversation with your formerly incarcerated parent, like my father, it was really difficult for me to be able to still, even though there was that trauma, even though there was the defense mechanisms, to even not go to that emotional place. Like, it took me a year to really understand, like, okay, I have to choose peace.
What are some of those defensive mechanisms that you saw when you had the conversation?
More so towards the responsibility of who was responsible. A lot of the times we do blame our circumstances and what we've been through and our trauma and our bad experiences. We like to say, okay, this caused me, or my mom or my dad, or this traumatic experience caused me to feel this way about what I was going through. But then again, it's also like, you're responsible for that. So it's like you can't really use that excuse. You know, I noticed a lot of excuses. I noted a lot of misplaced blame, or
just like no accountability.
Bad behavior, a lot of bad behavior that was just normalized because you had already seen it so much, you know.
I can see that.
I think that's a good point. I like what you said about choosing peace. That's a difficult thing to do, but when you get to that point, you're gonna feel such a release, and because you're making that choice. So nobody's controlling like your mind and your emotions, and you're not choosing to go down like that same path, and kind of letting go of some of the anger that maybe you feel, and get to a place of like understanding, setting those emotional boundaries. And again, I want to emphasize, like, your feelings are your feelings. You're going to experience hurt and anger and different feelings towards the situation, towards some of the positions that you were put in related to that situation. But learning how to choose a more peaceful outlook is something that you can work on. So the same way that you get into an emotional place where you're kind of spiraling down and you're having a lot of negative thoughts, you can switch that off to focusing more on positive things. And sometimes it's, sometimes I say it's fake it till you make it, because you're automatically going to rely on what you've done in the past. But work on changing that thought process. And it goes back to what I was saying, how your thoughts control how you feel and behave. Like, work on changing those thought patterns. And it's a matter of kind of like that repetitiveness. Like, keep telling yourself, I'm gonna choose peace. I'm gonna choose peace. And sometimes it's even, creating a mantra for yourself and giving yourself just a whole positive, like, spiel in the morning before you get up. And you can like leave notes on your mirror and things, reminders to get you into that positive place, to help you choose peace and focus on things that make you feel peaceful. And again, it's about trying to let go of that parent making you, feel better for the situation. Hopefully that happens, but again, that's something you can't control, how that other person responds in any situation.
I know, like, for me personally, I think that the reason why I'm so kind of hesitant to have the conversation is because of like the stage that my dad is in. I feel like it's so fresh. He's released, but barely released. He's on house arrest. So I don't really know, like, when is the time. So I wanted to ask you, like, when is a good, or how do we know, like, the time is right to have the conversation, or is there even a certain time that you should have it,
That's an excellent question. The time, it's going to vary from situation to situation, and I do think it's like trust, like your intuitive feelings, and it's more about also if you feel like you're in a good place to handle things as well. So it's going to be hard to predict whether or not that person is in the place to handle it, but timing is everything with conversations. So people avoid difficult conversations when things are in a good place. And that's actually the best time to have those conversations because people are more receptive. So if people aren't in a good place, then emotions take over. People, may blow up. But it's really, and even asking him, say, I really want to have a conversation with you. I have questions. I have things I want to share with you. Is this a good time? Are you ready to have that conversation now? But should we wait? So, posing that question to him. Yeah. But also, again, manage the expectations, prepare for whether he says yes or no, and then kind of go with that. So if he says no, definitely don't push the conversation because that means he's not in a good place and it's probably not going to go the way that you want it to go.
I think it's so difficult for me right now is because when my dad was first incarcerated, I was younger, so of course our conversations were different. Life was different, society was different compared to now in the 21st century in 2021. Like, everything has changed. So I feel like I've changed. I'm not a kid anymore. Like, I'm his child, but I'm not really like my duties in life have changed. I have responsibilities now. So I think that I'm just worried about us not being able to understand each other in a way that we used to understand each other. Like, we were best friends at one point. I'm not saying that we're not close now, but our relationship has definitely, needed some adjustments. And I think that that's my only fear for now.
And I think that's a normal fear because you're right, things have changed. And even if your parent isn't incarcerated, like your relationship kind of shifts and changes. And if you do feel that closeness with him, hopefully he'll, work on that. And you have to learn that your kids aren't, even like with my son, who's 25, I forget that he is an adult sometimes. And so I had to make that adjustment too. But it's something that, parents do. And your relationship shifts and changes. And so being able to adapt to that. But one thing that I think is good, maybe that you could do in the meantime, is journal, like your feelings. So that's something that I feel like is highly effective. Like writing down your feelings, journaling. I know things have changed and a lot of people like
got
your
the apps
age,
now.
Yes,
Just typing your feelings in the app.
Yes, exactly. Notes on your phone, whatever. But write down your feelings. Write down what you want to say. Write down your fears about the relationship shifting and what really you can express to a person what you need, and that's important because he might think you need a certain thing, and when in actuality you need something else from him. And it's would be difficult for him. Say he is positive and he wants to make sure this relationship works. However, he might not know what to give you or what you need. So it's important to be able to express that.
I definitely resonate with this a lot, especially like going back to when you were talking about setting those boundaries. It was very hard to set those boundaries, not only with my dad, but also with family members. Because a lot of the time with trauma, like we said, peace is a choice, and healing is a choice. But a lot of the times with trauma, it's what we're used to. It's that, comfort zone.
That comfort zone, comfortability.
Exactly, with that bad behavior. So I would definitely say, my question to you would be, with getting out of your comfort zone, I mean, it really is a self-explanatory question. Like, I kind of answered my question while I was phrasing it, but in dealing with that trauma, we know it is a choice to move forward, but what are some steps that you would say we could take towards, I would say, mediating or pushing that, other than being an example of it?
To get, to step out of your comfort zone.
Yes.
So you made a good point. People like to stay in their comfort zones, whether they're dysfunctional or not. So a lot of times it's familiar and it's comfortable. So stepping out of that is challenging, but I think giving, again, I always go back to like your mindset and controlling the controllables. And giving yourself the tools to kind of step out of that. So sometimes it's helpful if you are in a place to have somebody like me, a counselor, a psychologist, to kind of help you work through getting out of your comfort zone, because you're going to experience emotions and feelings and thoughts, and you have to be ready for that. So again, make sure you're in a good place in your life to experience some of those things. And I like to, when I think about coming out your comfort zone, I always think about running. And you know when you like run and you hit that, I like it sometimes,
Yes.
but you hit that place where you're like, I can't run any longer. But if you push yourself through it, then you can keep running, and that kind of always reminds me of the comfort zone, like getting out of your comfort zone. You're gonna hit difficult things, emotions, and feelings, but what typically happens is people backtrack, and then it just repeats itself. But if you fight through it and work through it, you come out on the other side. And I highly suggest working with somebody, because it could be emotional, a lot of feelings that maybe you're not ready to face, and having somebody just kind of help you like work through some of those things.
On that note, like, do you think that it's okay or appropriate to have these conversations maybe with your other parent, or do you think they need to just be you and the incarcerated parent? Like, I don't know if my mom would, I feel like my mom and my dad, they're friend, they have a good friendship, so my parents wouldn't mind together. But for people who may not have, that same support in their life, do you think it's okay to have someone come in your conversation?
I think it depends on the age of the young lady or young man. I think it does depend on the relationship between the parents, because if it's a lot of animosity, you don't want to bring that into an already difficult conversation. If you feel like you need that support, maybe it'd be a good idea for somebody else. If they have a good relationship, somebody else to come in, and then ask that parent if it's okay, your incarcerated parent. Because you want to be sensitive, to their feelings as well, and you want to do things that make the environment comfortable.
Why do you feel that there's such a stigma towards getting help or outreaching for? Because I know a lot of the times we do think we can control a conversation, or we can, like you said, having that control and setting that expectation that if they do say no or if they do say yes. But why do you think as far as getting that help, or as far as going to a counselor, like, it's such a stigma in our community, one, but I think in general as well as human beings, to outsource?
I think it's one of those things that, couple of things. So if you have a physical illness, you can see it. And so if you are, you can see some of the outward symptoms, or say, you have diabetes, you take a test and your glucose levels are off. It's more tangible, and that's more acceptable. I mean, take some medicine, see a doctor, get that leveled out. And with things that are going on, like emotionally, it's something that people can't see. And so a lot of times they're like, just get over it. It can't be that bad. And that's a little more difficult for people to deal with. Culturally, I think that it's always been, particularly in like the African American community, it's one of those things where whatever's going on in your house, that stays in your house. We're not going to share, our business. And so it's always been like this private thing. You don't need to go to somebody to help you, work on your brain. And then it was the stigma, like only crazy people go to, see a therapist. And it's just so not true. I'm always quoting DeMar DeRozan, because he said, don't ever apologize for wanting to be a better you. And that's how I look at like counseling and mental health help. Like, if you do have some psychological problems, there are illnesses and disorders that require medicine that do level out actual physical things that are going on. But we also are a resource for people to have support, to learn extra tools. I'm always saying, put some tools in your toolbox. Like, learn how to do some things. Our mind is the control centers of our body. But how much work do people put with their minds and their mental? This controls everything. So you're going to give out, if you're doing something physical, your mind is telling you to stop before your body. And so if you work on this, and most people don't work on that, again, because it's not that tangible thing that you can see, and the changes take a little more time, and you can't always see it. Earlier I said fake it until you make it, and because you're working on that, and eventually like you'll see those changes. But if you think about some of the habits, some of the things that you go on, you talked about like generations. So it comes like generations and generations, and this is what we've always done. And undoing some of that learning is difficult because this is, again, you're in that comfort zone and it's what you know. So coming out of that's hard.
Excuse me. What do you think some of the steps are to kind of like undo that entire mentality, or like break that cycle in our culture as a whole of like mental health is needed, like go see help, you know what I mean?
I think that like some of the things that are happening, people are becoming really outspoken, and I think that one of the things that COVID did that was positive was people kind of were with themselves or with their family, and like unfortunately issues started to arise. And I think just speaking out about it more, educating people, and just with the point that it's okay to get help. Like we all need help sometimes. And trying to normalize it. So getting out in the community, talking to people, making people feel comfortable. And I think the educational piece is huge, that it's not just if you have a mental health disorder. It's to help you grow, and there are positive things that come out of counseling. But I do think that so many athletes and like actors and actresses have been really outspoken about it, and I think that that's helped the industry as a whole. But just I think the educational piece.
Yeah, I saw a lot of athletes kind of like make posts and stuff like that about it. That was really good because I feel like a lot of people, they look up to people who are in positions that they want to be. So when they see them talking about it, then they do.
Absolutely. And it's also like, I really feel like an ongoing theme throughout our conversation is how much conversation really heals a lot of things. But really we're breaking down the steps to have an effective communication and open communication. So this is really, really good stuff.
With that, I kind of want to take it a little differently because I know, not for me personally, but I know a lot of people are experiencing, their parents, like a repeated cycle. Like, they'll come home, they'll have this, they'll talk about changes and they'll go back to prison. Then they'll come home again, and it's like, that's a lack of trust, in my opinion, because it's just like, you told me one thing, but then you're going back, like, do you really care if I need you here? Like, what are those things there? So for those people who may listen to the podcast, they don't have that parent that came home and want to be in their life. Like, do you think that a conversation is always needed in a way? Like, does it actually do a person, like, would that help their mental if they have those conversations repeatedly with somebody who's just like, back to square one again?
I think a couple of things. Let me first say that what you guys are doing is hopefully will break down some of that stigma too. You're sharing your stories. You're making people feel like people are going to watch this and say, I'm going through that too. And it's okay if I need to get help. So things like this, especially when people see people, their peers. So they're looking at you guys as well. So I want to applaud you for doing this and being there. You're welcome, because it's not easy to do that. So that's huge, first of all. Secondly, to answer your question, there's a couple of things. We talked about setting emotional boundaries. So you, the child of the incarcerated parent, has to be able to set those emotional boundaries and understand that they can't control like what that other person is going to do. So you can have that conversation. Again, it's for your benefit. And then you have to decide whether or not, I don't think repeated conversations like over and over are helpful if it's the same thing over and over again, but I think it's steps. Like your initial conversation might be just to introduce like thoughts and feelings and some of the things, and then other things might come up that you want to share. So I think it is like steps that are involved, but just kind of having the same redundant conversation and not getting anywhere isn't going to be healthy for you, and it's about setting those emotional boundaries. The other piece, and this is kind of like a side note, is that I don't feel like the system adequately prepares people for that transition. It's not an easy transition, especially, you were saying like everything's changed, and just think about like coming out of being incarcerated and all of the technology things. I mean, I have trouble, you know, like just trying to figure stuff out myself, and like how frustrating it must be to have to deal with that and then try to, you know, repair relationships and try to find employment, and it's just a difficult thing.
I briefly spoke about that a little on my episode as well, like the transition of, you know, being released and how that looks differently for everybody and what could be done to help that. Then so with that conversation, do you think it's like an appropriate way to have those conversations without parents of like helping them get resources? Because I know a lot of parents don't want to take advice from their children sometimes, or it makes it seem like, oh, you know, you're younger, stay in the child's place. Like, that's not my situation, but just I know that's a lot of people's reality, you know. What would you say, some advice for younger children who are just trying to give a tip to the parents in a respectful way?
I think, again, it depends on that parent and how receptive. And if they're not receptive, then it's probably good for your own emotional health to sort of back off. But if they do have like somebody that can be like the mediator, the in between, say they have a good friend that you're close to or a relative, and maybe going through, you know, them just to say, you know, I did do some research and dad or mom's not real receptive with this. However, like, is there any way like you can kind of pass this on, you know, to them? Because it is tough when you're, you know, when your kids become older and they're trying to help and be a resource, and sometimes it makes the person feel like they're not useful or that sort of thing. So just being sensitive to that. That was a good question.
I just wanted to add to your side note, and this is like my last. When you said about how systematically where prisoners have to pay back everything that they, you know, when they come out, there's a toe tag. Every time you go to a state, you have to announce a mistake that you made years and years ago, no matter what it is. Like my father, when he got out in 2007, since then he's been dealing with homelessness. So, I mean, there is a need in resource and understanding and this narrative change. So, thank you so much for helping us.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
This have definitely made me realize when I'm ready to have a conversation, I need to make sure that that's not only that I'm ready, but my father's ready, the environment is ready. Everything's got to be ready.
For sure. And again, if anybody needs like that support, you know, reach out to a mental health provider and let's together like erase that stigma.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Thank you guys. Thanks for having me.
Hello everyone, my name is Amari McDuffie, and now that you know, please share your story. Your story matters and is just as valid. If you would like resources, please check us out on our website. We have peer support groups. You can get that on our website or DM us on Instagram. We also offer mentors. You can do it virtually. Join us. And if you are a teacher or professor, please visit our educator resource group. We have a website, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, all of the platforms. We're here. We want you to join us. Please come out. Thank you.